just to check your knowledge. My first question would be when it comes to procurement, there's a whole lot of policy and procedure that is required in this organization. So would you walk me through the steps that you would take to ensure compliance with procurement policies and procedures in your role?
Okay, so as using the STAR method now, I will describe a situation when I was a procurement analyst with It and Co. It and Co at the time, and the my role was to ensure that my task was to ensure that the the situation was that I was the procurement analyst with It and Co, and I was saddled with responsibility of procuring all the raw materials that the company will be needing for successful production at the time, and to ensure that all of the contracts and procurement processes align with the company policy. And the task was to ensure that procurement and contracts were done in alignment with the company policy. And one of the challenge I had then was that at the time I was joining the company, some departments were not following. They were not following the company policy. They were bypassing the procurement department by buying and not documenting. Others were buying, and they were buying directly from approved vendors without recording. And this was a major problem for the company at the time. And what I did, I will go to the action I took at the time. What I did was to put in place standard operating procedure that will ensure that the purchasing procedures were followed before any purchasing was done. And in doing this, I worked with the IT department to ensure that before any purchase, any purchase will be input on ERP, there will be there's an automated there's an automation that comes in to let you know that any spend that's not going through the proper approval will be flagged by the ERP system at the time. And I also ensure that there will be need to raise PO for every purchase that is not going through that is not going through the required policy. And the result was that the compliance across departments was increased by over 30% at the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your response. Are we providing feedback right now, or
you might want to ask Louisa also. Let's hear from Louisa, and then we can round it up from that.
So are we rolling with the same question? I'm throwing a different question. Yeah. Okay, so Louisa, my question to you would be, could you describe a time when a supplier failed to meet their contractual obligations and how you might have handled the situation to resolve the issues?
Okay, so I'll give an instance of when I was in the bank. We had, because of the large numbers of branches that we had suppliers who were, we kind of had like a zoning for suppliers who were, supplying us with the pre-printed stationery. So I'll talk about deposit slips and all the works that is needed in the branches. And so we had a supplier for the North who wasn't forthcoming. And we had challenges. We had a series of delays, in producing or providing us with, making deliveries for the deposit slips and all the banking documents that we needed at the time. And so we had monitored it over a period of time and putting down all of the instances where they failed to deliver as at when due. And so I think it had happened like 3 times. And so we had to call them to say, look, this is what is going on. We have noticed this, both formally and informally, and called for a meeting because we were having branches who did have deposit slip for customers when they walked in, and that was a real bad signal for us. And so we called in the supplier, had our meetings with them, found out what the issues were, and we were able to resolve the issues, narrowing it down to paper supply. They had issues with paper supply in that part of the country as at the time. And once we were able to identify what their challenges were, we also worked with them in ensuring that they found a solution for alternative supply for their own, production, to ensure that we didn't, be at the receiving end at the end of the day. So we're able to work with them and then had an agreement, of course, also reiterating what the KPIs were, what was expected of them as suppliers, and what the repercussions would be if there was failure to comply. We were able to, we made quite a significant improvement in their deliveries, and we were back on track. And of course, it also helped us consolidate our relationship with them because they knew that we were supporting them in their business as well. Yeah. So it was a win-win at the end of the day.
All right.
Thank you very much for your response.
Okay, so we can provide feedback now. We heard from Grace. I think the question was from a compliance perspective.
Yeah.
Whereas I think Louisa's is a little bit different, but still on compliance. All right. So over to you guys.
Okay, Adela, you want to give your feedback first, or?
I was going to ask if you wanted to give feedback on the questions that I gave because I scribbled a few things.
No problem. All right. So my first feedback would be to Grace. Very good answers. I also like the fact that you took the initiative to answer the question, even though you were not called to answer the questions. Like it just crossed my mind when the questions came out. Like we didn't direct it to any one of you specifically. So that tells me that you are a confident person. So, and that confidence is very important when it comes to interview situations. Okay. The other thing is you were also confident in providing your answers, right? Which is also a good thing. Where I think you can improve would be in being concise. So the question was, how do you ensure compliance? So you brought out some things that if I were to answer that question, I would say where I was. So I was in this company, this was my role. And the situation was that there were purchases being made without appeal, which was not in compliance with the company policy. At the time, when we checked the record, we had about 10,000 purchases that are transactions based on reports from finance that had gone on without a purchase order. Then you go to the action you took, right? One action could have been like creating more awareness, also outlining the risk to the company if you did transactions without a purchase order, which is essentially without a contract, more or less, and then building that relationship with your internal stakeholders and making it kind of seamless. So that is where you are now showing your value. First of all, you're talking about a good appreciation of the problem. You're also showing that you're someone who knows how to take initiative, okay, in fixing a solution. And you're also showing your knowledge of risk, right? Business risk, okay? And then your action, the action that you took in engaging them and communicating and showing them how you can help them to comply. Because one of the reasons why people don't comply is they think either procurement is too slow or maybe they already have somebody that can do it. But then you show them the advantage of that, taking it a bit further, okay? And you now close it by showing the result, referring back to your number. So when you came in, the problem was you had transactions of up to 10,000. Now, in an interview, you can give a random number, okay? But it should be something that you are able to defend. Now that when you completed your solution, you had transactions of about, out of 10,000, 8,000 were compliant, or 4,000, okay? You give that number. So that was your outcome. So that's my feedback on that one. Then, if you have any questions, you can note them down. For Louisa, your question was about, I just summarized it as managing supply failure, right? You showed a very good understanding of what the problem was, okay? I read between the lines some things that you could have said, but the first thing, which is a positive one, is you knew what was going on. Not every buyer or procurement person would know that. So that's a good thing. Then you also engaged the supplier. Okay, you didn't just see, oh, there's a problem, and you implemented a solution. There was engagement, so you spoke to that. So it also shows that you understand what supplier engagement is. Now, the things that you could have also mentioned was to highlight your knowledge of the risk to the business if that situation continued. Okay? Sorry, just give me a second. Okay, so highlighting the risk the risk of supply to the business, okay? Then one of the things interviewers will be looking for is how you approach that kind of situation proactively. Now, in an interview, when they say, tell us of how you managed something, the truth might be you've been proactive enough not to even face that situation, okay? And that is also allowed, showing that you proactively, ensure that nothing like that happened. So it's two ways. So the first way is the answers you provided, but what you can also do better is to say, so when you ended it, you put a clause in the contract, for example, okay? And to manage that risk, even though the question was about supply failure, you can also say you came up with like a backup because of maybe the critical nature of what they were supplying, right? You had a backup supplier to address that issue. And the main supplier was aware of that. So that kind of threw, some level of competitiveness into it. And that's one proactive way to deal with it.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark, for the detailed feedback. Can you still hear me, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So, Adela, you want to?
Yes, I'll give a brief feedback. Grace, thank you for your response. I like that you use the STAR method and you clearly itemized when you were going step by step. It's something that I would advise anyone to do, provide some kind of structure for you, and also provide structure for the interviewers in a real setting. One of the reasons why they use the STAR method is because it helps the way they mark. It helps how they're marking your interview. So my first suggestion would be to both of you, never really rush to respond. You're allowed to take a few moments to think, to pen something down, to write your star and say, this is what I'm creating as my situation. So it's concise. So you can say, they're not expecting ready-made answers. Even if people are doing virtual and you might just have an answer in your head. So take those few moments to think, put your situation, your task, action and result, and try to make it concise. So I like the way you went through. Your example basically was about Maverick spend, and then what that kind of question would be looking for on the technical side would be looking at maybe your understanding of maybe policy frameworks. It might be internal policies. It might be, say, trade agreements or legal obligations. And then to basically follow, as Mark has said, a proactive approach. There's also the aspect of not always, because there might be a situation where you didn't exactly shine with your proactivity, but to show that you went through a methodological way to handle the situation. So they're also looking at, you want to show how you were able to monitor the situation, educate the people who were conducting this maverick spend in the organization. And then I like the way you infused the use of the ERP. You mentioned the ERP, even if you didn't exactly structure it well on the technical side, which I'm not particularly going to be scoring you on, but the structure that you went through, I found it impressive for, I mean, first time panel, public interview, you didn't do too terribly. So in those kinds of questions, you want to structure this. So these are the things basically I'm looking for. What is the familiarization with the system? How did you see the misalignment? I want to put it back in place. What exactly was your task? You're not necessarily defining anything. You're just showing that you know the processes for documentation and then the control. And then you spoke about transparency when you spoke of the other stakeholders and involving them. So I think that was pretty okay. There's still a whole lot of room to improve, but let's move swiftly on. Louisa, I like your situation. You seem like you had your hand on what that situation was with the case that you gave. One thing I would point out, like when I talked about the star, using that whole star or SWOT method, you lingered a bit on the what the situation was, and then I didn't see that clear distinction when you moved to what your task was. And I think I know the reason why. You used a lot of we. We did this and we did that and we did this and we did that, which I completely understand. But the trick now is with interviewing, you're supposed to show how you personally outshine, which is why that structure is key, where this is what the situation was, it happened to the entire organization or to your team. And then the task is what you were tasked with doing. Yeah, I understand it might be a big organization where you really didn't have that kind of authority or power to do a whole lot, but that is how you must present it during the interview. You must show how the role that you played, how you were instrumental in doing things. You are probably not the one who wrote out the entire SOP. It was probably sitting down there, and then they just weren't using it. But that was SOP was Gracie's case, but that's what I wanted to point out with yours, the use of we instead of I. Well, I think technically it showed that you knew what the situation was as a buyer. As Mark said, most buyers just handle whatever request is on their table and move on. So I think it was a good one. There's always room for improvement. There's no perfect response. There's no perfect response. So yeah. So we're hoping that we can just add one thing, even if it's one thing you can take home with that. So that's my feedback.
All right, all right. Thanks so much, guys. I also like the fact that emphasis is also on the feedback. Because guys, this is the whole point of this session. It is not to say, oh, you didn't say this well, or no. We're focused on how you can improve going forward to help you to be successful in your next interview. So over to you, Mark, for the next question set.
Okay, thanks, Abiodun. So my question would be to both of you. So maybe Louisa, this time you go first. Can you describe your experience with procurement processes, including supplier selection and evaluation?
Okay. Gonna start with, I'm gonna give an instance of when we had to buy some promotional items, branded goods for the bank. And because the promotion cut across the country, we're looking at goods in millions, a range that cost branded pens to, just tokens that could be given at the banking hall to customers when they come across. And so we're looking about buying about 10 million worth of branded items. And that came to about, I think at the time it cost us about 60 million naira in terms of value. And so we had to do a vendor selection. The bank had, at the time, had a pool of vendors that we're working with. I was working with vendors that were categorized into, the big end vendors, the middle end vendors. And so for some of the items, I had to specifically look at vendors who had capacity within that range to handle that kind of expense. And so I did an RFQ for vendors, because some of the items were pretty standardized. For instance, the branded pens, they were standardized. Did an RFP to these vendors, an RFQ to the vendors. They came in with their designs and their costing, and went through the tender process, carried out an evaluation on their tenders, basically based on cost, because these items were pretty much standard and almost any of the vendors could provide them. But we also had the branding aspect of it. And so we selected the vendors that fell within that category, looked at their RFQs, evaluated based on cost and time of response time, how quickly these vendors were able to bring in those items into the country. I mean, they were being imported. And based on that, we selected, I went through the documentation, selected based on cost and previous performance. And sorry, there are two folds to the question you had asked me. You'd asked me on supplier selection and evaluation. Right. So for the supply selection, based on price, I selected a vendor who could meet up. And I'm sorry, I'm mixing things up here, so forgive me.
Do you need me to clarify?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
So what I want to know is your experience when it comes to procurement processes, including supplier selection and evaluation. So it's procurement processes, including supplier selection and evaluation.
Okay, so for the procurement process, would have a requisition from the department. As at the time I was working with the corporate communications department. And so they would send in their request, what they were looking at, the activities for the period, what they were looking to buy, and so that I could project, that will help me in putting my timing and cost as well into going through with the procurement process. And I would then get an approval for this procurement, of course, going through the approving authorities of the organization, get to sign off, and then begin to engage vendors to get a pre-approval to go into the process, and then get vendors to come on board. They sent out the RFQs, they provided their responses, and based on that, I evaluated the vendors that had participated in the process. Based on price, I carried out that selection, because for that particular branded item, it was what almost anybody could provide. The tweak to it was that there was a particular branding we needed. And so I'm getting stuck here. Forgive me.
It's fine. So here's what
That's
we'll
fine.
do. Here's what we'll do. Take your time, think through it. We'll let Grace answer the question, and then we'll see if we need to come back to you or just provide feedback on the responses. Okay.
Okay, so thank you once again. The feedback had helped me to put up my answers in a more structured way. Thank you. So I have a situation when I was with It and Co as a procurement assistant. And in this role, I was responsible for assisting the buyers and senior buyers in procurement of all goods and raw materials that helps in the essential running of the operation. And in this role, I helped in initiating purchase requests, and after approval is given, I raise the purchase order, I track order, and I also, after tracking the order, I engage suppliers to ensure that they are meeting up contract terms and they are in alignment with the terms that they were given. And the challenge at the time was that the challenge at the time was that we had multiple suppliers and they were not consistent with delivery timeliness. And what I did, am I not mixing this up? Okay, so I was dealing with inconsistencies because I have multiple suppliers, and my task at the time was to work collaboratively with the buyers and the senior buyers to ensure that the procurement process was followed. And what I did was to assist them in putting up a scorecard which help us to evaluate suppliers, in helping us to evaluate suppliers with the metrics. And we have scorecard. We have a scorecard like we're measuring suppliers in terms of their quality delivery, timely delivery, the cost, and their responsiveness. And I also assisted buyers and senior buyers in participating in refining the selection process by participating in RFQ, the request for quotation review, and supporting the procurement team in also performing due diligence before contract is awarded to new suppliers. And the results we observed here was that suppliers' reliability was increased by over 30%. And like I didn't mention that earlier before we did this, supplier reliability was on 10%, and this improved to 30%. And we're also able to shorten the procurement cycle, and stakeholder satisfaction was also improved, and the department receive supplies at the needed time too. That's my results.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. So Ari, we have time to give Louisa and Koji to respond again, or should we just go ahead and provide feedback to them?
For
We can hear you.
For the sake of time, let's just go ahead and provide feedback, so that we can move on to the next question. Yeah.
Okay. Let me briefly provide feedback on to Louisa. Thank you for the attempt. To probably your surprise, it was a good attempt. You were doing well, and then you lost confidence. Yeah. So I was looking out for, the question was basically your experience on procurement processes, which typically would involve supply selection and evaluation. So the question probably threw you off board, but they said, describe your experience with procurement processes, including, so just make sure you mention that. That's what the question asked for. So it's looking for you to demonstrate knowledge or your experience with end-to-end procurement. Probably from the needs assessment to contract award, if not post-contract, and how you follow policy and how you ensure fairness. One thing with interview questions, I would say, is that not every question would perfectly have a star response. So if you are confused, ask questions. Yeah, so that's why that short moment where you take to do what is the situation and the task, and it doesn't seem to be falling into place because I've said, describe your experience with procurement processes. If your company has company procurement processes, you're not recreating a new one. You're just telling us what your experience was with it. So you're telling us a story. So the idea is storytelling, which you already do. Just tell us how you've gone through one. You don't, in this particular case, you don't necessarily have to be the star girl, just say what you have done to show that you know the process according to what, yeah, you got to where you were selecting following price, I'm assuming lowest bidder. And then you said, I'm confused. I'm like, you're doing well, keep going. So my feedback would be with confidence, would be about your confidence. Just keep going. The idea, pardon my French, is to just bullshit your way through to the end. So you're probably struggling with giving the perfect response. Just go to a real example that you know of your procurement process and run through it. Worst case, you will miss supplier selection and evaluation, but you've given them everything. It shows that you know that end-to-end thing. You've mentioned the supplier selection because you mentioned cost. That's how you used to select. You had mentioned your RFQs. And it's simple. Most companies don't select based on quality or the value that they bring. They just go with lowest bidder. You mentioned those value-added things like how you work with stakeholders. You don't necessarily need to justify why your decision was made. The company has said, we're going to be lowest bidder. Then you could speak on things like post-award. This is how you probably just manage the supplier relationship, something like that. So my feedback to you, it would be to just have more confidence to show that experience that you already have. Yes, even if you think you are confused, you could say, am I missing something in the question? Just so, buy a few moments to think while they're telling you, yes, yeah, we said, supply evaluation, and then you keep going. Even if you can't, just run through it to the end. So that's that. It's okay to have the nerves. It's fine. Yeah. So that's my feedback. To Grace, I like your structure. You went step by step with what you did. And as you started, you said you were giving us using the feedback that we had just given to you. So you had shown the same, yet it improved with regards the structure, which was good enough. Do not always rush through so that we can understand. Yes, don't rush through to the end. Speaking personally, I've been in situations where, of course, you have the nerves, and they asked me a question that I had answered several times, so it was easy for me to respond. And I went step by step by step by step by step, and I finished my question. And there was almost 30 seconds of silence because I had more time to speak. Yeah, so it was an awkward moment. So that's my feedback to you. Don't always rush. Just go step by step to show I know what I am talking about, kind of thing. Yeah, so that way you could also see where this is what the situation is. But here you're thinking, what's the situation? There's no real situation. We're saying, tell us your experience with procurement processes. What really is the situation? So you could say, oh, this is how this is done here. It's just, yeah, defining what the procurement scope is. That would be the situation. And then your experience was I was the buyer I was the person who was working with senior buyers. That now is your task. So it's not particularly a problem you were solving. It's just you relating your experience. So there's a what I call it, a skill with storytelling, which I think this particular question would be demanding. So that's my feedback. Over to you, Mark.
Yeah. Thank you, Adela. For the sake of time, I'll try to be brief. Louisa, the question was your experience, not how it should be. You were trying to make it how it should be, okay? So the interviewer wants to know about your experience and try to see, do you even understand if there is a process? Not every organization follows a process. That is the reality. So this interviewer wants to know if you currently follow a process. And then you tell that story. This is a process I followed. And not every process will be the same. Not everybody goes around 7 or I think it's 14 these days, procurement cycle. Not every purchasing goes through all of that, okay? So be confident in your own experience. This is what I did. Own it and talk through it. Pick one transaction as an example that you handled, one purchasing project that you handled. It could be the $60 million project that you talked about. It could be 200,000, but you follow the process. And my process was, I got a requisition. I checked if we had the item already in the warehouse. It was not available. I put out an RFQ, and I let the vendors know we're going to evaluate them based on cost. And we selected based on the lowest cost. And we did a PO, and that was it. That is a process, okay? So it's yours, own it with confidence. Then for Grace, yes, similar feedback to what Adiola told you. You say the right things, you want to rush through them. You are saying the right things. You mentioned scorecard, fantastic, right? For me, that's alone, because even the process of developing a scorecard, it's a process in itself, right? Because your scorecard is going to have the other things you mentioned, quality, it's going to have time, it's going to have cost. So fantastic response. I liked it. Just, pace yourself and let your answer be concise. So people are able to pick from when you're transitioning from one aspect of your response to the next, and then until you close it. Abby, you're muted.
Yeah, thanks so much for the feedback. And I hope we can move to the last question set here so that we can have some time. Although we have only just one question from the audience so far, so we can leverage on that, to answer, the third questions. I mean, to ask the third questions of the candidates. So I think, Adela, you want to try this time?
Okay. I will ask both of you the same question. I'll ask Grace first, which gives Louisa time to think, and this would be one that you would use the STAR method for. So it might be, I use this word loosely, easier for you to respond. So with modern day procurement and procedures in this organization, we have a whole lot of, we're building a new team that handles our supplier relationship management. So could you describe a time when you've had to address supplier performance issues? Feel free to tell me what steps you took to resolve the situation and what the outcome was.
Okay.
Supplier performance issues, yes.
Okay, so thank you, Adiola. I have had a major issue with a supplier at a time when we were running two major projects together as an organization. We're opening two major central kitchen at the time, and this supplier was one of our key supplier, and they were supposed to she was supposed to supply us one major ingredient for the opening of one of the second restaurant, and this supplier was calling to say she's coming, she's coming. She was running late. She wasn't meeting deadline. She wasn't meeting the SLA terms and all of that. That was the situation. And the task was that I was supposed to ensure that this vendor supply in time, and the two projects should be commissioned at the set time. The two outlets were to be commissioned. That was my task, to ensure that the projects were commissioned at the set time. And the action I took was to communicate with internal stakeholders, the production team, the project managers, met with them and understood the functional requirements for the project. And I understood the impact of what this delay will be having on these two projects. And we agreed that we're going to get a sub-supplier to bridge the gap. And that was what we did. I quickly set out an RFQ, and we got several suppliers to bid, and we got a supplier to quickly bridge the gap. And I also initiated a meeting with this key supplier to understand what the issues were after we had calling the supplier which had brought in samples, and the samples had been tested by the quality department, certified okay. This was able to bridge the gap so that the project will be delivered in time. And I initiated a meeting with this key supplier to understand what the problem was. And at the meeting, I understood that it was a communication gap. The key supplier took the business as took us for granted, and they weren't communicating their problems to us. And at the meeting, I highlighted some of what the impact of this delay will be having on the opening of the two projects, and highlighted the impact to the supplier, and the supplier apologized, and we both agreed on a corrective plan that the supplier will have to put in place to ensure that this will not happen again. And the supplier also promised that they will be supplying after the sub vendor had bridged the gap. And after putting up the corrective plan, the result was that we're not the two projects were able to launch the two projects at the set time, and the supplier relationship there wasn't any strain on the relationship. We're able to maintain the relationship, and after using the supplier, the old suppliers too came in and supplied, and the relationship was still maintained, and the project too were delivered at the same time. I hope I've been able to do well this time. Thank you, Adiola.
To convince and not confuse us. Louisa, the same question to you. How do you handle supplier performance issues? Can you provide an example? Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Okay. Yes. Okay, thank you. I'm going to talk about an instance where we were trying to get, we're doing security printing in the bank. And so we're looking for vendors that could handle the printing of checks. And so there was a vendor as at the time that was like rated like the #1 in the country. And so we engaged him. However, he wasn't delivering to us as when due. We had a series of meetings with him, but he was still unable to. So we said, look, you need to do this. We need to find out what the issues are here. And eventually he opened up to say, look, he had too many demands. Bigger banks, I mean, not well, will I say, as at the time, bigger banks were giving him much more to do. And so he kind of like put us in second place instead of, meeting up with our deadlines, kept giving excuses. We knew we had a challenge there. So we said, okay, you know what will happen? We looked at the challenge and said, look, we would scale up and give you much more of our business to do if you're able to meet up. And also for your reputation, take you to countries where we operate outside the country where we were, situated. And that was an opportunity for them to also shine. And so they picked it up and decided to, show us their capacity. And in the process, we had to collaborate with them too, because we found out that their factory was not able to do as much as we needed to take care of our needs while they were taking care of, the other businesses they had. And so we also invested in their businesses at the time, provide them with funding for additional machineries for them to buy. And that helped them to scale up their capacity. Of course, the opportunity was that the end result was that we were able to get what we wanted because they were very good at their job. We were able to get our supplies made. We also became priority for the vendor at the end of the day. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you very much for your response. Somebody has gone from 0 to 100.
Yeah, and that's the moment I was looking for, and I think you got there.
Thank you very much.
That's why she's smiling. She knows.
Yeah. I'll let Mark go. I'll let Mark go first, and so that we can try to be brief and run through.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you, Adiola. Thank you, Grace. Thank you, Louisa. So I will take Grace first. So fantastic job, right? Like when I put down a note to say, okay, area of improvement, you talk about it and you knock it off my list. And that's what we just kept on doing. So you were able to identify the issues and you ticked all the boxes. You highlighted what needed to be done, the deadline to have those shops opened. That was your task. You pointed out the problem. The supplier was not supplying. You were proactive in your solution, getting the backup supplier who performed. You engaged the supplier to understand their problems. You managed that relationship, and both parties became better for it. That was a fantastic response. The only thing I would change might be the order in which you put them, but that's the most, like, you had everything covered in that response. So well done for that. For Louisa, also a fantastic response. Sorry, no, Grace was my first feedback was to Grace.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Then for Louisa, very concise. I probably would throw in some terms in there just to, make it look.
Spice it up.
Spice it up. But other than that, yeah, you actually went like really high level this time. The kind of terms I would have used. So first of all, you decided on a single sourcing strategy based on the reputation of the supplier. So I will throw in, so the interviewer will know, okay, this person knows what single sourcing is, in case we need to do it, and understands how to do that. Then understanding what was the root cause of the issue. You were deprioritized, basically. You understood that, and then you took action proactively to take yourself back to number one on the supplier's list. So you went into strategic collaboration, right? So you probably moved that supplier from your along the spectrum of your relationship model. That sort of, so those kind of jargons, basically, just to spice up your response. But yeah, Good job.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So now we seem to be scoring close to 100 on the star. That's the soft part that will go. I would focus more on your technical response. The thing is with interviews, sometimes they always come back for clarity to say, okay, let's get something right with what you said. Grace, you pointed out that the situation was schedule adherence. You needed them to deliver on time. And then your task was to make sure that you were going to prevent delays, which was good. And then you moved to stakeholder engagement, but you spoke about speaking with internal stakeholders and not necessarily with the client. You went to internal stakeholders and you guys decided to start a new procurement process to find another supplier. You didn't tackle why is this contractor not delivering on time. However, Mark pointed it out that because I started noting that down, and then later on, you now mentioned how you had now gone back to the first person. Yeah, so I now went back in my thought into okay, so your task we've gone back to now speaking with them. So that structure, so you like he mentioned, you want to give reasons why um the first line of action you guys took was to find subcontractors. Yeah, so it's either you're telling us that um they'd probably done the same thing in the past, so you're learning from, but just throw those reasons why you might not necessarily fill the interview with technical jargon, but give the logical reasoning why. Because someone is wondering, okay, the person is not delivering. Why are you jumping to subcontractors? Why are you not engaging them to follow through with some kind of, at least establish some kind of corrective action that we could take? So, but you followed the STAR method. Even if you often went back to throw in something extra, which is good for clarity. So because I was wondering why, and then you later mentioned it. So in my notes, I struck things I was going to mention out. Oh, she's mentioned it finally. She's mentioned this finally. I'm like, okay. So I think that's pretty good. I like that. There's the quick, recovery. It seems like your confidence has, I mean, it's built as we are saying in this um hour that we've been here. So to Louisa, thank you very much for your response. You've gone from 0 to 100. Now, I mean, cooking with firewood, now you're cooking with gas. Your situation was clear. You there was the same delay, so schedule. He wasn't the contractor wasn't delivering on time, or was showing that they were not going to, because I'm assuming it was some kind of blanket order to say every 3 months or something deliver. So those are the kind of things you want to throw in. We had the blanket order with this person, and then he was supposed to be bringing in a certain number of checkbooks every 60 days or when we ask, and then there are delays. But I like that it showed that whole proactive supplier performance monitoring that you did, and your task was to expedite. And the first thing that you did, which I really commend, was direct communications with the vendor to find out. But so typically, organizations would lead towards penalties if you're going to put them in a tight spot. If you deprioritize my own project, it's not my problem that you have too much on your plate. If you've agreed to these terms and conditions, so it's something you might have wanted to throw in there. So if you are not penalizing them, you might as well want to tell us the reason why you are increasing their scope for them to prioritize your project. Are they the only ones who can perform this particular service? So it's something you might want to throw in there. There's no other person who can mint and print checkbooks for us. It's just them. So the only way you could have that buy-in was to increase their scope so that they could prioritize your project. And that is why you can't penalize them or something like that. And nonetheless, your example showed a corrective action plan. which was good, and then the results. And then one thing I'll also say when we're throwing results, this is for both of you, is they will typically say give numerics, say it increased by 60%, but you do that at the risk of your interview asking you how you measured 60%, 30% improvement in supplier performance. Some of those things that are not very clear on how you achieved. So if you tell us that this is we went from 10% to 35%, how are these metrics how are they determined? You could say, oh, we use this particular ERP, or these are the KPIs that we use, but some interviews would expand on the question. Their next question is offshoots of the previous questions they've asked you. So be careful with things you cannot defend. Don't throw those kind of things in. But so far, I think both of you have done really good, and I'm personally impressed with the performance today. I'd call it a performance because being in front of a panel and other people who are just silently watching is quite brave of you. So thank you for showing up.
Awesome.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys. At this point, I want to ask if Grace or Lisa have any question.
No questions, but very thankful for the opportunity. I almost backed out because I've been, a bit of movement for me the last 2 weeks. So, but yeah, I'm very thankful for it. I'll take them into consideration. One of the things I know that I have issues with is, using the right terminologies. I need to remember to chip those in my interviews. And yeah, I think that will help to scale up my performance. Yes. So thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I would also like to thank the panel for taking out time for the interview. Thank you. And the feedbacks have been very, 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 very strong for me. And I know I've been rushing, so I'm taking notes of that. And I'm sure we're going to raise the next interview. Thank you, guys.
So what I want to add to that, because one thing I always say is that when it comes to interview, you're like at the negotiation table, even though it's not clearly stated that you're negotiating. So from the process side, in terms of how you are answering, is a very good way to think about it as a negotiation, and also maybe the research you've done on this company will come in handy for you. For example, when they were asking about compliance to policies, if you understood the policies of that company when it comes to procurement, it will be a very huge leverage for you if you can really hone in on their own policies to speak to how it connects back to the question that they have asked you. So that's one thing I just want to point out. Then secondly, your sitting position is also very important. Particularly, Grace, you're a little bit slouched most of the time when you're sitting, and it could communicate something else to them, like, oh, maybe you're not confident, or maybe you're not so interested in the conversation. So we need to be mindful of these things. And also, I want to emphasize that when you are trying to collect your thoughts, you want to say something, avoid saying rather keep quiet. That is, just keep saying because that also could take away from the professionalism that you are trying to portray when you are answering their questions. So it's gonna take practice. I'm also fond, I was fond of it. And I didn't really realize that every time I'm talking, trying to express myself, because there is a link between your mouth and your brain, right? You will tend to fill in with the filler. So if you can practice more to avoid it's going to take things like this, like an actual engaging in conversation, and you become self-aware that, ooh, I was saying too much during that conversation, so that the next time you're able to take out those filler words, and it really helps to improve your confidence as well. So I think we had a question that we can answer quickly just so we can round up. What is that question again? So how important is it to be specific about the organization when you are the organization where you worked when describing your situation? I'm thinking based on the responses of Lisa and Grace, you will see that it's not really the important thing. Really, the important thing is if you use the star format, it's basically the situation you were dealing with. And this is one thing that a lot of us are struggling with when we are trying to write our experiences in our resume. We use languages that they don't understand in Canada. And it tends to also take away from what you are communicating when you start mentioning Dangote or anything like that, or like they don't, even though we know Dangote is richest black, but they still in Canada, when it comes to Canada, they can't really connect with a lot of these things. So as much as possible, those things are not really necessary as much as the situation you're describing and how you can really articulate yourself to make them understand what you are putting out. And I'm sure Mark and Adela were able to speak to that a lot, given the feedback that they have provided. So I don't know if there's any other question. I saw people asking for the video recording. Yeah, go to the YouTube that I posted there. You will see a lot of other recordings that we've done in the past. Please, I really love this for myself. Okay, so on here we can have that conversation. So anybody who wants to have conversation about how they can gain access to this type of support, we do it every third week of the month. So the next one will be next month. And I think the planning of this one has been in the making for some time. But eventually we made it